Are those the three buckets? Is that the way to think about it? Human moderation, community flagging or moderation, and AI? Is there another way to think or slice and dice it?
Yeah, I think it's a very good way in terms of the resource allocation to think about moderation and community driven versus platform driven. And from a platform driven perspective, you have humans versus technology. Another way to slice dice, it could be the proactive versus reactive.
Folks, welcome back to the GlobaliD Podcast. And Tiffany, welcome to join us today. Where are you today, Tiffany?
Well, I'm in Indianapolis.
Indianapolis. Now, what are you doing in Indianapolis? How did that come to be?
Well, see, the sky turned orange in San Francisco and the Bay Area, As an outdoor active person, I had to flee from the Bay Area. Midwest was the choice.
All right, well, that's an interesting trip. Maybe if you could give a little bit of your trajectory. And I mean, I remember how you and I got introduced, but maybe you can weave that into as well, because I think that's part of our story, and just tell us a little bit more about your interests and trajectories, and then we'll jump in on today's topic.
Sure. Greg, you and I, we met on a panel. Mm-hmm. I actually honestly forgot the topic of that panel. I definitely know it was in blockchain. You were the moderator. I was the panelist, and I got to know the no bullshit Greg right away from that panel. And
I think we talked about Telegram, and you were pro Telegram, and I think you took a roll of the dice on the Gram launch, which I thought was heroic, and want to just talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think now knowing what we knew, I think a lot of things now you remind me, a lot of things we discussed back then, turned out to be what really happened. I think that the reason to invest in Gram, it is a no regret move. It is not for sure the return optimizer, right? And that's basically what I think we said. And also it was a reflection of how turbulent the space is with the regulators, intervention. But yeah, and I think it's kind of relevant probably to what we meant to talk today, right? And in the trust and the safety space, right? This two pieces of the puzzle.
All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about trust and safety today, and about networks like Telegram, which are relatively censorship resistant. It's one thing to do that for messaging. It's another thing to do that for money. They attracted some ire and attention of the regulators. But talk a little bit more about your journey. I know you've had a bunch of different interests, but how did you end up in the trust and safety space? Talk a little bit about just your trajectory.
Yeah, today I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for an AI company called Spectrum Labs. So we provide the AI infrastructure for online trust and safety, and really focus on the areas like gaming, dating, social media, marketplace, and ad tech spaces. And what that means is we use AI to detect and respond to toxic behaviors like sexual harassment, hate speech, racism, white supremacy, all the way to human trafficking, for example. So you can imagine how topical, thorny, and relevant, given that we just passed the election year and we are still, in the pandemic. So that's Spectrum Labs. But if we take a step back to look at the broader picture of online trust and safety, you will very quickly realize that technology alone wouldn't suffice to solve the bigger problem. I think the bigger problem is that we do actually not have a good definition of what is good enough. There isn't a consensus among any platforms to say, great, that is defined as the good definition for sexual harassment, for hate speech, for racism. We know what is bad. That's why we see so many scandals when things went bad and caught in the headline, but we do not have definition for what is good. And for that reason, I started a nonprofit last year called Oasis Consortium. So the idea is to get, I focus on what I call future-proof platforms. Those are the platforms where I think the line between gaming, dating, social education becomes so blurry, right? We do everything on the same platform. So it's the metaverse. So we actually convene the people from gaming industry, dating industry, social media, and the live streaming platforms to say, look, how we define what is good. So Oasis stands for openness, accountability, security, innovation, sustainability. And under each, we have specific measures from how we define the community policies, how we enforce them, and how we actually balance human moderators with technology moderators to actually create a safer environment. So those are the two pieces of the work I'm doing trust and safety today. And to your point about a journey, I came to the US about, I think, 6 years ago. And that was the moment I pivot into, I would say, the tech enterprise operator. Before then, I was an investor across emerging markets. So in APAC and Sub-Saharan Africa, and mainly actually focus on the physical infrastructure in energy space. And nowadays, I more use the investment acumen to make sure the operations are smooth for the tech enterprises.
Very good. I know you have a bit of a background and interest in quantum computing as well, and so you kind of flipped my switch on that to get my attention. But for today, for privacy and safety, I came from a world back in the beginning when there was AOL, and there were human content moderators. Just they were sitting in the room, lurking in the room, and they would boot you out if you were badly behaved. And then I graduated to a world of Craigslist, where there was community flagging. And so now today we have the AI robots. Are those the three buckets? Is that the way to think about it? Human moderation, community flagging or moderation, and AI? Is there another way to think or slice and dice it?
Yeah, I think it's a very good way in terms of the resource allocation to think about moderation and community-driven versus platform-driven. And from a platform-driven perspective, you have humans versus technology. Another way to slice dice, it could be the proactive versus reactive. So proactive is when you actually have technology, because you know that when bad things happen on the internet and when the gravity is very high on Twitter, on Facebook, where Instagram, when you have a lot of following, you really want things to be intercepted if it's really bad, right? So the proactive piece usually only happen with technology versus reactive part, you actually can leverage the community as well as the human moderators. I think that's another way to slice and dice it.
One question I have, it's a public policy question. I've been involved in a couple of like the classifieds industry, and there was a concern that if you do moderation, either proactive or reactive at all, then you jeopardize your status as a platform and begin to become a publisher, and you lose your protections under Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act. And so it seems like this thing that if you do anything to moderate, you actually become responsible for everything. And it seems like a contradictory signal out there. How are you thinking about that? And where do you think we're going as a country and in the world about this tension between being a platform where you're not responsible for what's happening versus a publisher where you are? And is there a middle ground, or is this just an inherent contradiction? Like, thoughts and feelings on that front?
Greg, I'm not surprised you asked me about policy, given your track record. So here are my thoughts. I think the first bucket as to my understanding of Section 230. I think the second bucket would be what are the fundamental pieces we are not talking about, independent of where Section 230 will go. But those first principle fundamentals, without being solved, will cause forever the issues, whether Section 230 stays or goes away. So first on the Section 230, Section 230 itself does not actually specific talk about platforms versus publishers. All what it says, I would say there are kind of two pieces of this. I would say the beauty of the only survived section in Communication Decency Act. back to the 90s, which says that the individuals, the users are responsible, for actually potential illegal content you publish online. However, the platforms are not responsible if they choose to moderate out certain things, right? So if you think about it, I think the beauty of it does allow the platforms to thrive in a competitive way, in the past decades. So to your point, contrarian to people think that if Section 230 goes away, will actually have big impact is to the thriving of the free market. I would say actually Section 230 allow different platforms to thrive with their own brand identity. Now, the challenge really comes to, coming back to what we actually opened this conversation with, is that there's no consensus about what you moderate against. I think that's the issue. Imagine tomorrow Section 230 goes away, every single platform is held accountable to moderate. What are you going to moderate against, right? We don't have actually that consensus on certain things. So I think that is the fundamental issue one here. And the way I look at that, you actually almost, I would say, draw two lines. So I just want to unpack a little bit. So first is that the platforms are responsible for illegal behaviors. For example, COPPA, which actually protect the children data privacy, and then the NICMAC, which actually really prevents and demand reporting, for potential children harmful behaviors, right? So for those regulations in place, platforms are held responsible to report, right? So there is a consensus there. People know that child pornography is not a good thing. You need to moderate. Human trafficking is not a good thing. You need to moderate. That's fine. Let's just say it becomes more and more prevailing that across platforms, those are the things people need to really take care of for platforms, because there are physical legal requirements out there. Now things get really muddy when it comes to things like sexual harassment, hate speech, racism, because, and of course, political versus and stances. It really comes to how the platform chooses to brand their self based on their tolerance and the definition of those toxic behaviors. Now, the issue today, first of all, if you are big platforms, you might have a policy team to define the community policy. It's just like the governance for the platforms. Issue is usually you don't necessarily enforce them, right? From the policy making to the enforce part, there is a gap. Now, even you enforce it, it is a black box to users as to how it was enforced. Now, if I think the enforcement was unfair, do you have appeal process to come back to it? This thing just doesn't exist. And I think it's not only that it's not only the platforms don't have actually the definition of that. Even you potentially have a definition for your big platforms having the resources to do it, you don't have the process to actually enforce and make it transparent. Not mentioning the emerging platforms who actually really focus on the growth, they really cannot have the resources to think about community policy and etc. I think those fundamental pieces are where users, investors, platform builders need to think more than actually the Section 230, because even if it goes away, those issues I just mentioned will stay. And the topics and debates we're having will stay.
I remember back in the days of Craigslist, we were looking at content, and we would find that we would post something that Craigslist, somebody in the community or Craigslist itself would object to. And what they would do is they wouldn't take it out of the database, but they would ghost it. And when they ghosted it, it meant that when I looked on my computer for my IP address, I would see it, but nobody else could see it. And so it meant that the party that posted the problematic content wouldn't know that they were actually being hidden or excluded from the rest of the community, but all the rest of the community would have that content unseeable. And so I don't really quite understand the ethics of that, the legality of that is like, is there, and I don't really hear the conversation happening at that level of subtlety of this concept of you have the right to speak, but we have the right to make sure that you're not heard. And I don't know if how that fits with free speech or public policy, or whether, like in this new consortium, is the concept of ghosting considered acceptable, or is that considered unacceptable? I just don't even know how to begin to think about that. Thoughts on your part?
Yeah, it's very interesting. I like you make those kind of case laws, through them on my way. And I find that the usual way I take to approach them are really coming down to the first principles, as I mentioned. I think first of all, I want to talk a little bit about trust, right? We often talk trust and the safety, right? I think so far the discussion points we talked about are mainly around safety, right? The legal behavior should be gone. For those undefined notions, every single platform have their different definition, what is considered to be safe, and et cetera, et cetera. And I think the piece we last talk about is the piece of trust. And the way, to your question about this ghosting case is how I think about the trust. For me, trust is kind of the currency that one user or one customer lend to a platform or brand. So I trust you without you show any evidence. But things go wrong when evidence shows the opposite, that I cannot actually trust you anymore. And when there are enough users and a customer withdraw the trust and therefore the currency, that is when actually platform go belly up, right? So in your case, the way I think about it is how my image and my trust for Facebook can be very different from my image and trust for TikTok. Could be very different for Twitter and for Parler. For Apple and for Google, and for Roblox, for Riot Games, for Bumble, for Me Group, right? The reasons being that they have different policies and different product features which embed certain ways which enhance trust or damage the trust. So in the case of ghosting, among all the other potentially the product features which will impact my user experience, it will actually affect, if I'm the person ghosted. Once aware of that, I will make a judgment. Okay, my personal values are just not in line with the platforms, I go away. But if the majority of the people think, look, this is the good way to keep the broader community safer, and my values aligned with it, there are not enough people withdraw the trust, the platform survives. So for me, is once a platform makes a decision on the community policy and embedded in the product features, they very quickly construct the brand equities intangible in their balance sheet out there and let users to choose who want to be on the platform versus not. So I think that's the way I look at this. And usually I've come down to the process versus the specific cases. In the consortium, we talk about openness in the sense that we don't want to say we have one set rule that fits all, because that doesn't work. Facebook have been there for decades, and TikTok is new. They just have different way to approach it. The importance is we encourage diversity in moderation policy making team. We encourage a gaming platform to actually have the diverse voices from the very beginning for safety by design. Accountability is about you have one person to look at this, who is accountable for this, the budget for this, right? In corporate America, if 5 people own something, nobody owns it. That's a situation with trust and safety. Security is about data and identity protection. Innovation is the balance between humans and the right technology for the right problems to solve. And sustainability is about, how you think about the digital wellness. And those things wouldn't change platform to platform, though the threshold of how you want to define your product features to cater to your own branding for the platform is up to you.
I'm still left scratching my head. I saw the congressional hearings after the GameStop incident with Robinhood, where people started talking on social media. They talked up a big frenzy. I think the key line was we can be. These were harsh words. They said we can be retarded longer than you can be liquid, and they just did all this media buzz to get people to buy GameStop. And I guess my question is, how does that fit in? Do social media, do they try to censor people talking about a particular stock that's being talked up by social media? Or I don't even know where to begin on that. I don't think what happened was actually illegal. I don't know whether it's even unethical. It seemed like, the common man against hedge funds, and they used the social media to pump and dump. And yes, I think the tools you're talking about could pick that up, but I just don't know what to do with all that. I mean, I can have all the oversight boards I want, but I just don't know. I don't know what to do about that.
Yeah, see, I think there is a quite good podcast. I think Steve Hoffman did. I forgot was Pivot or Sway. So he specifically talked about his approach to the incidents, and I think the 2 points here. Again, for Reddit choose to keep that space for the users,
right,
which leads to that instance to the point. It is their branding, and then they cater to the users who choose to stay there, and vice versa. Users choose a platform who choose not to moderate certain things, right? And that's one thing, right? That is come to the trust piece. That is the intangible Reddit carries, and then therefore. Now, and honestly, this is the thing, you're right, it's a common man versus hedge funds, but whatever actually the gusts that users create online and cause the movements on the Robinhood, we've seen for decades what hedge funds are doing. It's right. It's a real. I mean, but the difference maybe is through actually the newspapers, through the briefings. So it's almost like the common man or the younger generations who are less established than the institutions and older generation choose their own way to make the market, and it's potentially the only way. For them actually to shake up the establishment. So that is a philosophical question, but to the point of the trust and safety, you might see tomorrow there's another Reddit absolutely regulate that. And if you're in the camp think that need to be protected and moderated by a platform, then you would choose that platform over Reddit. But a different person can think differently. So trust is a branding, trust and safety definitely are a brand nowadays.
I guess, and so at GlobaliD, we have message threads, we have groups, and aspirationally, what we're talking about is instead of us having a single moderation standard, we would like it if there were multiple moderation standards and the users and the people that run the group could plug whichever one in that they want. We might build a default one that just has a sort of a laundry list of types of abusive or criminal behavior that are scanned for, but there would, in our perfect world, not be a requirement that you use our filter versus someone else's. And so basically would nod our head to the fact of filtering, both reactively and proactively. We would like to support flagging and whatnot. But at the end of the day, instead of having one set of monitors and oversight organized by us, we'd like to think of that as a plug-in capability. But again, I don't know if that's going to pass muster with the the marketplace, with regulators. I'm actually really clueless about that. So, I mean, do you have an idea of where we're going to be maybe 5 years from now? Like what's going to be the same? What's going to be different in terms of how moderation works, how trust is rebuilt?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I truly appreciate you take this approach, right? As I mentioned, one size fits all approach doesn't work. I think, enabling decentralization while having a standard process is a good way to approach it. Absolutely, I think that is a confirmation there. And I think today the truth is that we just don't have enough resources, from regulators' perspective to catch all the platforms. So we really intervene to the worst case that happened, like the bears outrun, right? And then the heel links toward it, right? So I have to say you have done a great job not to be the bears outrun there.
All right. So last question. Do we think Donald is going to get his account back at Twitter and Facebook, and B, do we think he's going to get his own social network off the ground? And like, what does that have to say about where we as a society are, at least here in America, about trust and safety today?
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a zinger of the last question.
Yeah. So whoever who puts Donald Trump back on their platform, they put that in their balance sheet of intangible as a brand thing, right? And then the followers and the users will choose to go to that platform because of the platform does that versus not doing that. Again, trust and safety are a brand today, and it really is to what means to us. I will add to one point to it. One thing I think a lot about it, and I haven't seen really technology doing that. I think partially GlobaliD might address it, is this user reputation, but really with this gravity to it. An individual and a politician like that who has gazillion followers, one single tweet means way more than 1,000 tweets from me. By the way, I don't really tweet that much. So how you actually define the gravity versus the person's the gravity, therefore the impact for any behavior, and versus the person's only user reputation. Whoever who figure out that calculation will be the biggest contributor to today's democracy and the freedom of speech and online trust and safety.
Well, thank you, Tiffany. I think we're at our hour. What's the best way for people to get in touch with you, either through Oasis or Spectrum? And any other closing thoughts or mentions?
Yeah, so if you type my name, there's a lot of Tiffany Wangs, but with Xingyu, Xingyu in the middle. You can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm very happy to follow up with any chats. And if you have thorny questions like Greg just threw my way, I'm more than happy to catch them and have a discussion.
Well, Tiffany, thank you for joining us today, and thanks, folks, for sitting in on another episode of GlobaliD Podcast. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.